Today's guest is Anirudh Varma. He is the Associate Director of Engineering at SpotDraft, which is a company that focuses on streamlining the contract lifecycle and an automation platform, which we'll probably hear a little bit about. So thank you for joining me today, Anirudh.
Hey Jeremy, wonderful to be here. And yeah, I'll just quickly introduce myself again, right? My name is Anirudh and I'm from India. As Jeremy mentioned that I'm the Associate Director of Engineering at SpotDraft. SpotDraft is essentially like a end-to-end contract management and lifecycle automation platform, right? Which means that we essentially focus on in-house legal teams and try to solve their problems in regards to operations and creation of contract and execution and management and so on, right? It is a problem that turns out to be more interesting than I thought it would be. Especially, I think there's a lot of overlap between some of the operational related problems that we face as developers in our day-to-day when it comes to collaboration with different teams. I think there's a lot of overlap there with what lawyers in-house legal teams face as well, right? So, yeah, that's what I've been doing for some time now. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about a bit about your background. So talk a bit about where you're from, since I don't have too many people on from India, so this is a new thing, and and just a bit about yourself, how you got started and what, you've already talked a little bit about your company, so yeah, let's talk a bit about your background.
Right. So I'm based in Bangalore, which is like probably called the Silicon Valley of India, right? Like we have a lot of tech companies in Bangalore. As far as where my background, right? I come from a very non-traditional education background. I'm a self-learned developer, and I've been doing this job for around 9.5, almost 10 years now, right? So I started off as a Java developer, right? So it was something that I learned sort of in high school and something that helped me get my first job as well, right? So through the years, I went from like being a Java developer to, dabbling in C Sharp, Python, and so on, and then eventually moved to the front end side of things. Played around with React, TypeScript, JavaScript, and my current day-to-day is mostly built around Angular, right? So how it happened essentially was I had exposure, like fortunately I had exposure to computers at a very early age, right? And like most people, I was using them to play video games.
Right.
And right. And it essentially turned into a curiosity of from playing a video game to, oh, how do I make this, right? And then I got introduced to something called Scratch. It was a project by MIT, I think, right?
Yep.
It was one of those do-it-yourself video game creation tools, which also taught you like the basics of programming, right? And that's essentially how I got interested into this field. And I was like, okay, this is something I like. And programming was a very easy way of, like scratching your itch to build something, right? And eventually it was like, I get a lot of joy in building like small tools for myself and for others, right? So it started off like uh, building like, calculators for our physics classes, for example, like, oh,
Right.
can I make this thing? I don't want to do this computation again and again. And I know how to code. Let me build a thing for it, right? So it started from that, and I was like, okay, this seems like something I like. And I was fortunate enough to, like make it a career itself. So then I got my first job. That was also like a pretty lucky break for me, honestly. And it started off like the job essentially said, okay, it's a HTML, CSS job, right? When I got there, they ended up interviewing my Java things as well. And I was like, okay, just do everything, right? So this was a day when Java was, when web apps were essentially Spring and stuff and not really SPAs, right? So if you knew Java and you knew HTML, you could do the entire thing in one go. So that's how it started off, right? And yeah, it has been like a journey since then. I've learned a lot of things. It has been a lot of like the internet has been like this university for me, right? So I've been learning a lot just by picking up different courses at the right time, probably, and then like just building on my skill set on that front.
That's very interesting. So how did that first interview go? I mean, did they have was it a challenge to convince them that you were a good hire?
Definitely it was. I think so. I still remember, like the person who interviewed me, he mentioned that I was just curious about a 19-year-old applying for this job without any educational background, and that's why I called you up, right? But what I did was essentially I took my laptop and I was like, hey, this is something I've been working on, and it was some sort of a side project, right? And I just showed him the code, and honestly, it was not the best code in the world, right? um, it was. I still remember like it was a Java project and it was based on Swing or something. And um, it was like, it was so messy that I think the entire app was like 3 Java classes, right? Or 3 Java files actually. So like a bunch of like anti-patterns, God objects and all going around. But I think what he probably saw was that, like I had this idea of, okay, what programming is and how we can like sort of solve problems. And I think the best part was like, okay, he was able to give me like a bunch of practical business problems on the spot. And I was able to make sense of them and, like sort of break it down on what my understanding of them is. Right. So that way it was a very different interview experience as well, where he didn't ask me like your conventional whiteboard questions. Right. And it was a lot more around the practical problems that they were facing and what anyone else faces in our day to day, right? Like our day to day is not really a lot around the whiteboard problems, but it's more about, oh, there's this business process that we have to automate. How would you sort of do it? Right. So I think that's where I got lucky. That's why I said it was a lucky break, because it depended on the person who was interviewing me, how they perceive someone who has no experience and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You're right. You dodged the white. I hated whiteboard interviews because
Yeah.
you're right. You get in the job and you're never doing that problem they put on the board. It's not one of the real life situations. So how did you decide then to transition to your new role? Why did you leave there? Right. Kind of not because they did something bad, but as you're growing your career, were you looking for just something different?
Yeah. So I think it was one of the like somewhere I was reading and I read a bunch of advice around how it's a good thing to be a polyglot, right? So I was doing a lot of Java and C Sharp, but Java and C Sharp are essentially the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Very, very, very similar. So, and I wanted to do something else. And so I spent around 3.5 years at my first job. And um, so I thought, okay, I know what this is and I understand this very well. But now I think I should learn some scripting languages as well. And initially I picked up Python because there was like usage there, and I was like, okay, and Python is great for like building toys and scripting. Not building toys, like you can build serious stuff as well, but it's great to build toys, right?
Right.
It's very lightweight and all those things. So that's how I said, okay, I want to do scripting. And then this was a time when all your SPAs were blowing up, and like React and all had come out, and Angular 1 had also come out, but React was like the one which was actually taking off at that point. So I was like, okay, sounds like this is a new hotness and I'll run after this, right? And yeah, that's how I picked up on React. And so actually between my 2 jobs, I did around 8 to 10 months of freelancing, right? Just to sort of take a break. It was supposed to be a sabbatical, but I ended up freelancing anyways. And that's where I learned React and stuff, and also did like a little bit of Android programming in the middle, right? So it was yeah, it was just that decision that, okay, I want to learn something new. And again, like maybe it was like a lucky thing where that turned into this opportunity that I got at SpotDraft, right? So it was like, okay, learn JavaScript, learn Python, let's see what comes up after that. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, if you're going to be in the web world, you cannot go wrong learning JavaScript. And there's tons of frameworks, right?
Yeah.
And sure, learn the ones that are popular, like you said, the new hotness, right? Because it gets you the opportunity. So that was very smart of you to recognize that. So as you've gone through this experience, I mean, it's very unique to get into IT from without going to college. I mean, I have met people, but it's still rare. What's something about that experience for you that if we came to you and kind of gave you the power to make a decision, a change, if you will, what's something you would change about how we do things in IT?
I see. So one thing I would say is probably around hiring, right? I've like essentially my role has transitioned a lot from being an IC to sort of being a manager and so on. And I've done a lot of hiring in the last 1.5 or 2 years, right? And I know it's a very tough nut to crack, to be honest, right? Like that hiring process is something that you keep iterating on, you try to keep improving on. But I think one is like, of course, whiteboard interviews. I don't think every role demands it. Like it should be something that you should sort of take a call on whether it is something that you need or not, right?
Right.
Go for fundamentals for sure, right? Make sure that the person's fundamentals are in order. But I don't think that whiteboard interviews are like the best way of going about it, because anyways, at this point, like, you solve enough lead code and you can sort of get an understanding of it temporarily, right? But it still does not ensure that, it's something that you inherently understand. You understand how to solve the lead code problems, but it
Mm.
does not necessarily mean that you still know when to reach for the right tool at the right time.
Mm.
I think programming is like any other thing where if you practice a lot, I think there are two things to this, right? Like practicing and reading a lot, because it's about identifying what pattern, what tool, what language, what framework to reach out to solve a particular piece of problem,
Mm.
right? Um, so I think we should like sort of focus a lot more on what's already on the resume and try to meet the candidate where they are most comfortable, right? Which means talking about their experiences and then building on top of that. So one approach which I have observed usually works fine is, I just like ask the people to walk me through their experiences and then sort of try to unwrap the thread from there. So if I find something which they can talk about comfortably, then they just try to go deeper into that. And at that point, you can sort of like talk about abstract problems as well, right? So if someone says that, oh, I built this blogging platform, then you can go deeper into how they would have solved something like a XSS attack or something, because you are allowing user generated content to be stored and rendered. Then how would you handle something like that? So I think it's always better to go deeper from that perspective, because it gives the other person an opportunity, because we don't know what opportunities they would have gotten at their previous gig, right? What kind of decisions they would have been able to make. Were they in a decision making capacity or not? So hiring is definitely one thing that is something that we can definitely improve on. And I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to make changes over there. So yeah, that is one thing. Other thing, I think, the second thing which I feel, and I don't know if this is like a common problem across the world, but something that I've observed over the years is that sometimes, like there can be like a very hard boundary between engineering and non-engineering stakeholders. And I wish, like I, I hope that, we are able to sort of collaborate better in the future as well. So um, I know that, like sometimes from an engineering perspective, obviously we all have been there where oh, this timeline is too unrealistic and you are not allowing me to do my best work, right? But I think at the same time, it's important for engineers to understand the business problem that they're trying to solve
Mm-hmm.
and really sort of try to empathize with the end user or whoever it is that you're building for, right? I really like working at the I really like working closely with non like business stakeholders. I feel there's a lot to learn over there, right? And by sort of limiting yourself into, no, this is not my job, and just relying on like a PRD or something to sort of be your only source of truth is actually very limiting sometimes, right? So I think like that is something as an industry we should probably sort of improve on by trying to give more exposure to um, or like building better ways to collaborate with between engineering and non-engineering stakeholders. I think that's like really important.
That's interesting. Is there a large usage of Agile Scrum in India?
Yeah, there is.
Because I know
Um,
Scrum was supposed to solve that problem, right? In theory, you got your product owner, you got your Scrum master, you got your business, real people business, and then representatives from across the project, right? Your engineering, your security, your developers. I have, to be honest, I've never seen it fully work, but I know it's supposed to solve the problem.
yeah, I think the thing with Agile and Scrum is that everyone runs their own version of it,
Yeah.
right? Um, so usually it's like very few people who are involved in the sprint meetings, and then they are the ones who are trying to understand it. But I've like, as you said, no, it's like I've never seen it fully work either, where it's like flowing through the team and different people are sort of comfortable or interested or like exposed to the actual business problem being solved to a degree where they can sort of ask questions from a user's perspective. Like it's very difficult for yourself to put yourself in the user's shoes if you are not really exposed to that problem fully, right? And I think it's on both, like from a mindset perspective. I think sometimes as engineers we can get into this mindset, okay, that is not my job to understand, right? And sometimes you may not be getting that opportunity either. So it's both ways.
Yeah, that is challenging. You're right. And I've met lots of people like that. But at the same time, I agree with you. I mean, what I'm hearing as we've had this conversation is problem solving is probably your number one superpower, right? The willingness to understand fully, not just from a technical perspective, but the business problem they're trying to solve. And then figuring out how technology can empower that.
Yeah. And this is like, obviously this is like my experience and anecdotal, right? But I think that can be one of your biggest levers for growth as well, right? From a career perspective, because and that does not mean you have to get into management, right? Even as like a senior IC or an architect, there's immense value if you are someone who also understands some side of the business, right? Because that ability to sit down and with anybody who is like a non-engineering stakeholder, whether it be someone from product, whether it may be someone else in your team or in your company, and then just being able to sit down with them and understand their problem and being able to break it down, being able to collaborate with them. I think that is like a huge lever for growth, right? Both from a perspective of the career itself, and also if you are someone who likes to sort of understand how other functions work, because it helps you build that chemistry with other people, where then you can sort of be exposed to what they are doing and get an understanding of like what happens, what's actually going on in other parts of the company and the industry as a whole.
That's so true. So what's coming up for you next? Do you have any big projects or any interesting things in the near horizon?
Yeah, I think like what's coming up next, there are a couple of problems that I'm actually trying to solve. Like one problem that I'm actually really excited about is so as I said, no, like we are trying to solve like a legal ops problem at Spotra. And what that means is that in my like what we've seen over the last 3-4 years is that there are a lot of processes out there. And the first preference for anybody is to sort of, how do I move to this new platform without like a big change in my process, right? Which means it's a nightmare for us to program.
Right.
Right. Because you have like so many branches, so many flags, so many configurations. And at this point, we're like, okay, if I change this one thing, what domino is going to fall? Right. So we are, and at the same time, like we want to keep it a product which is like easy to use for users, which means we don't want to go into like a full enterprisey thing, because enterprise products are not known to be user friendly, right? But we don't want that to be our bar. So we are sort of trying to figure out what is the best way, taking a lot of inspiration from like low code tools as well, because now the world is evolving, right? Like low code tools are a reality. Fortunately, people are also exposed to them, which means that they have some semblance of how processes and systems work. So trying to get inspired from them and seeing how we can adopt some of those patterns and practices and give the users the same flexibility that they have today, but at the same time make our jobs a little easier and make it easier to sort of enhance things, add things, and make it easier for the users to change things around, right? So, like designing their own workflows and everything like that. So that is one thing which I'm really excited about, because it would, if we are able to do it right, it would like unlock a lot of velocity on our end, right? We'll be able to move faster, we'll be able to ship faster. It would reduce complexity in terms of testing and deployments and so on. While at the same time, the users, I think, would have like much more flexibility, even more flexibility than they are having today. So both from a business perspective and like from the sanity of my own team, I think that's like a really exciting project for me right now. That is one thing. And the other thing obviously is, and I think that is something like from a larger industry perspective as well, is essentially like, I'm pretty sure you've been like following all the hype around like Chat GPT and all.
Yep.
But even before that, we've been sort of playing around with GPT and like other models as well, and trying to figure out what implications does it have on the industry and on other industries, right? And I think there is a lot of interesting work happening there. And overall, I think in the future, it also means that the line between low code tools and things like GPT, I think the lines between engineering and sort of people who are doing prompt engineering might be getting a bit blurred, right? Wherein like a lot of people who are not engineers will get sort of introduced to things like this and then as engineers, maybe it's become something that we sort of become like the bridge between all this intelligence and the end users. And how do you best take what is raw today in GPT and then provide value on top of it? So I think that is like another thing which is super exciting right now.
Wow, that's very interesting. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story and your journey, and it's inspiring to hear that you are just a learner who figures it out, which I would hire you in a heartbeat. That's how I look for people when I'm hiring. So it's been great getting to get to know a little bit about you, Anirudh, and I wish you well.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. It was a great conversation.